Hi, I'm Brandon Carter, and I directed and co-wrote Everything Goes to the Fish. The story just came from me and my sister wanting to get together. We wanted to write together. I haven't really worked with her in like a writing capacity. She's like read all my scripts that I've worked on since high school, but back in high school we were making things constantly together and wanted to work with her again.
The writing process started with me and Brandon talking about how we haven't made anything together in a really long time. Because we made films primarily together until we started college, and then I was busy and he was busy, so we did other stuff. But I have fish obsessions, which we've talked about. Fish rights are important to me. I won't talk about it right now. But we were joking about doing something with that, and then it just kind of turned into a ridiculous script about a fish getting everything in kind of an Aristocats way, but people being mildly less sinister about it. No one's trying to murder anybody. We're just trying to get some money.
Plot-wise, I just wanted to do something weird and out of my comfort zone, and different.
After all, he was an eccentric.
Humor.
We've always like collaborated. We've always shared ideas. It was just working with my sister has been something I've always done just to the side, never in like an official capacity. I've always just been like, hey, what do you think of this script? What can I change here? And she's really good about giving me very intense, solid feedback.
Because we're on the same wavelength most of the time with writing, it's easy to discuss why we don't feel like certain pieces of dialogue or certain plot points work in different areas. And I feel like our working relationship is a lot easier than writing with other people for either of us, because we have to describe what we're going for less, just because we've been doing things together for so long.
Back when we were both in high school, we would make things together on the fly and we'd come up with ideas together. And I ended up getting a lot of the credit for that initially, which is where I think some of the story came from, like the backbones of like her character and my sister, feeling like she was owed something for the amount of work that she put in, for the amount of time that she's kind of been under the radar. And so I think that made its way into the story, but also was important for me to understand as we started working together again. And it was a really like good, solid relationship. She had great ideas. It changed the movie and for the better.
What's better news? You should have led with that.
I've worked with my sister as an actress before, but very rarely. I didn't write a lot of roles that I had thought of her for. Yeah, I hadn't worked with her in like a professional capacity ever, I think, like in a long time. Especially not as a director, actress, with a short film we did back in the day, Spider and Bones.
It's strange. Spider and Bones was another one where we did a more extreme style, and it was also shot all in a night. And so it was kind of fun to revisit that type of relationship.
That was also a very experimental film, and this one was much more straightforward and much more exact and precise. So it was a different experience altogether. It was new to both of us. Amy plays Mildred, who is a would-be heiress to a great fortune. And Mildred feels like she has been owed this fortune for a long time and finds it ridiculous that her uncle would have willed everything to a fish and not to her, who was next in line to have everything.
I didn't want anyone in the script to come across as like twisty mustache evil. Like no one in the situation ever suggested that they murder the fish, which I always thought was really interesting, because most people, like, a fish isn't, it's like, it's a fish. Just dump the water out and take the money. But my character is just like, can we just get it signed over to me so I don't have to wait for the fish to die, which I found interesting.
So the way we wrote it is we came up with the story beats before anything else. We had the concept when we were like pitching ideas to each other. We settled on this idea, and then we together came up with how things played out, what the little beats were, what things changed, and that really helped me going forward. I wrote the dialogue, and then I presented it to her later, and she would go in and change things, tell me like where some lines didn't work, and we were working on that until the day of shooting. Even on the shooting script, I had cut a line out that we didn't need. So on her recommendation, we would change lines, and she'd say, oh, that character wouldn't say that, or here's a different way of putting it. It doesn't need to be so exact. She really knows how to get me out of my, not comfort zone, but head about a line.
That settles that.
How fortunate.
The reason it's 4:3 is I've got to confess, I worked on 2 other projects that were 4:3. Jeffrey Williams, I've Got Skeletons, and Nick Flemon's Eye on the Nile, and I really wanted to play with that toolbox, I guess. I wanted to, and that motivated me to say, okay, what am I going to do with 4:3? Why is my film in 4:3? The aspect ratio motivated me to look at the frame more and decide okay, what did I want to do with each shot? Why did it matter that every shot was in 4:3? And how could we use the aspect ratio to our benefit? And so I think it really helped us with focus and choosing what to focus on, kind of like the panels of a comic book. It's because with that first opening shot, we start on the fish. And you could easily cut, okay, we start on the fish, we'll go to Mildred, and then whenever we go to the banker, whenever it's his part of the scene, when Mildred comes back in, when she's been moved to actually sit down, we could have cut to her, but we stick with all of that. We keep the camera moving. It stays the same shot because it's the same arc. That's a story, and that, or even a joke, and that joke ends with the punchline of Melvin's back there, and that's when we introduce the person who will be our protagonist, who is the focus of our film.
Mildred Melvin.
And you are?
Melvin. My name is Melvin.
The character of Melvin is played by Jeffrey Williams, who I've worked with several times in the recent past on a lot of different projects. He's directed me, and I've directed him. I've had the opportunity to direct him in several of my most recent short films, and it's been a really good developing relationship. The character of Melvin, as Jeffrey pointed out,
I portrayed Melvin as this small character. He doesn't want to be seen. He'd rather be unknown by everyone. So of course his stature would be really small, and I realized his voice would be kind of small, and he's just very meek. So I knew portraying him moving smaller would help me with everything else. So after moving small and keeping it all inward became the voice, and I knew it'd be small just like that. Even though he's tall in stature, he's awkward. So it creates this juxtaposition of his size and how he moves.
I've had him go emotionally softer. He doesn't yell. He doesn't get to express harder. It's very internal, and I could definitely see that in him in this performance. And we worked on the performance together because Melvin is a very secretive character. On the surface level, he looks very weak, but he's actually got the plan that sets an emotion that he actually succeeds in saving the fish's life. And so he plays both Mildred and the banker by being perceived as weaker.
Ordinarily, a fish like this one can live around 10 to 15 years. I've been taking care of him for 5, but...
15 years?
I pulled a lot from 2 previous characters that I've played with Brandon. Spider moves very dainty as well. So it was interesting that physicality was the same for Melvin and Spider. So I knew physicality was as big of a role in Everything Goes as it was in Spider. But the assuredness of Melvin is similar to Harry Hoffman. He's very sure of himself as an actor and performer. He knows he can do it. So internally, Melvin and Harry are very similar. I guess one of the most challenging things on the day was that being directed to say 2 words is difficult instead of having lines to deliver back and forth between characters. It's hard when it's 2 specific words I'm sorry. I had difficult with that line in the film. It's I'm sorry, and then it'd say it you're actually apologizing. So it's I'm sorry. It's where's your inflation or not inflation, but where's your inflection, and what's your intention behind each word?
And so he initially wasn't. He was a vague idea of a character. I knew I wanted him to be quieter and play in the background, which is another reason he starts in the background of the first shot. But by the end of the film, he comes into the foreground. He's close up with the fish, and he gets what he wants. Every character in the film gets what they want.
I guess Melvin being small to the public but sure of himself, is he kind of has something to prove. And that's how I feel as an actor. I have something to prove when I'm going into these roles, just because of, I guess, my past as an actor. Each new character is a challenge, and I'm having to prove it to myself that I can do it, because each one's so different, especially working with Brandon. They're always different, and I'm always trying to prove to myself that I've got this. So it's interesting, because I feel a lot like Melvin does internally.
He's weaker in the argument right now, and he's the last to be introduced. We start on the fish, who's the focus of the whole story, and Mildred next, because she's got the problem. The banker offers one side, and Melvin offers the other. We also had Nick Flemons playing the banker. The banker I wrote in the script was a character who was literally crooked, and so we had him be slimy, his hair slicked back. We put padding in his suit so that he would be lopsided, and we always shot him kind of tighter than the other characters. The light was a little harsher and flared around him, and the camera always moved queasily. We went Dutch with his character a lot.
I'm afraid you're gonna have to hold out until our aquatic friend here... You get the point.
I wanted the whole film to be like a German expressionistic style of filming. I even thought early on that it would be black and white, or at least look black and white. And so I wanted things to be surreal. And with that came the look of the fish. I looked at a few different reference points for like a fan design poster for The Little Mermaid, but done in Tim Burton style. And I saw a picture, like an artist drawing a flounder for that. And I thought, that's an interesting look for that. And so I tried to evoke that. Also went to an aquarium a couple times to see, because fish are weird. And so I wanted it to look weird, but I also wanted it to look sympathetic. So big eyes, a fin, kind of like, I don't know, it looks like a space agey, like dorsal fin, like you'd see on a shark. And like its back tail is like a bat wing. Just for that spookier element, and he was made with very muted, like green and gray colors. Because initially, yeah, I wanted it to be black and white. Later on, that kind of changed when I thought, okay, I was talking with Avery and the lighting design. If we amplified the color, the fish would match the setting if everything is just cranked up. And that also came with wardrobe. It evolved, I guess, naturally as like more pieces came together. And so I wanted specific lighting. I wanted it to be very intense. After deciding not to go with the desaturated black and white look, wanted to have really strong, vibrant colors.
I think in terms of what Brandon and I have shot together in the past, this is very different in color. This is the most color that we've used, hands down. A little bit of the lighting style too, in that it's more harsh, hard shadows, and a lot of contrast. Very deep blacks and very bright colors, which was very fun to play with. And the colors themselves were very representational of the water with the fish and being underwater and being in that world, and then the red of almost not knowing what's coming next and maybe throwing people off on how the ending of the film was going to go and the true intentions of some of the characters.
Guillermo del Toro talks about like eye protein. So eye candy, I like the look of color. I love colors. We had these gels that I thought were beautiful, and I wanted to use them. So I wanted to find a way to use them that would help the story, that would amplify it. And that's pretty much all it was. It was to just visually like show you who is at odds and like separate the characters with color. Not only with distance and with framing, but with color. The whole look of the film, I think, is made to tell the story visually, apart from the dialogue, apart from the actual plot that's like unfolding. I think if you watch it with the sound off, I think you can kind of figure out what's going on and who people are based on how it's shot and how they look.
I think a new thing we did with the camera movement is the 180 flip. We actually built a rig to go on the tripod that had an L bracket that held the camera that we could spin on axis of the lens. So that keeps everything in the world the center. It keeps the fishbowl in the center, but then everything is moving around the fishbowl, which helps nail home the point that the fish and Melvin are what we should be caring about. The camera movement was very intentional. Throughout the film, there's not as much, there's a lot of whip pans, but there's a lot of push-ins during the longer dialogue scenes.
The banker is constantly moving, it's constantly canted, it's constantly like harsh. And that's because he, at the root of it all, he's bothering Mildred, he's threatening the fish, and he's going against what Melvin wants for the whole thing.
Brandon has a very set way in his mind of how he wants to come into the it's all storyboarded. We have a very set plan on how we're going to do it, and then where I come in is when we're on the day, how we light and how we shape each shot with the light and the environment that we're in. And that's where I think we both complement each other well, is that he has an idea and a way the film is going to cut, and then I come in and give my input on how it all comes together.
There's a Western that we're trying to get on the ground. I am making it more complicated because of how specifically I want to do some of the effects in it. So we're going to talk about that a little more and storyboard it and then bring it back to you guys and see what you think.
Next, I want to play something that's a little more brutish, I guess. Almost brutish, but also manlier, something that I'm in a lower register. Because I've been playing these very meek and small characters. I want to kind of open up and be louder and maybe yell. So that'd be fun to play for Brandon.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.